The record shows that Jesus said and did some things that appear puzzling at best and downright contemptible at worst. He told people to hate their families, to cut off body parts, to eat his flesh and drink his blood. He demanded perfection from his followers and warned that most people were straight on their way to hell. He said that those who did not behave themselves would be cut up into little pieces. Jesus called those who weren't Jewish dogs and upheld the special status of the Hebrews in a way we would call ethnocentric, if not racist. With no women among the 12 apostles, he looks pretty chauvinistic. He apparently had anger issues, cursing a fig tree because it didn't have any fruit on it, and driving out merchants from the temple with a whip. He sent 2,000 pigs to their death in the sea. One person who didn't think Jesus was so great after all was English philosopher Bertrand Russell. In his famous essay, Why I Am Not a Christian, Russell claimed that Jesus was mistaken when he predicted that he would return within a generation, that he was unethical when he cursed a fig tree and caused the death of thousands of pigs. He found Jesus' teaching about hell particularly reprehensible. He said, quote, "There is one very serious defect to my mind in Christ's moral character, and that is that he believed in hell. I do not myself feel that any person who is really profoundly humane can believe in everlasting punishment." We tend to overlook Jesus' bad behavior and instead create a Jesus who is more palatable, one just like us. Albert Schweitzer pointed this out over a century ago in his classic volume, The Quest of the Historical Jesus. Schweitzer wrote about the so-called first quest for the historical Jesus, when 18th and 19th century rationalistic scholars tried to find the real Jesus behind the supposedly naive and embellished accounts in the Gospels. Schweitzer showed that these authors tended to ignore the context of first-century Judaism. They transformed Jesus from a wild-eyed, apocalyptic prophet, the real Jesus according to Schweitzer, into a 19th century gentleman and philanthropist. For them, Jesus was an inoffensive preacher proclaiming the fatherhood of God, the brotherhood of man. In other words, Jesus became the mirror through which they saw themselves. The same thing happens today. Soft-spoken Sunday school teachers tell stories in which Jesus appears a lot like Santa Claus, speaking kindly to the children and telling them to obey their parents. Punch and cookies await if they will listen and behave. At a men's conference, Jesus is a man's man with calloused hands and burly muscles. He was a carpenter, after all. He clears the temple like a linebacker. No one would mess with him today. In a Chinese church, the picture of Jesus on the wall portrays him as Asian. In much of the Western world, he is white with blonde hair and blue eyes. Enter an African American church and you might see a black Jesus. Each year when I teach the Gospels, I open my first class by showing a variety of film clips from movies about Jesus. An amazing diversity of films have been produced over the years. From the somber, aloof, and stilted Jesus of the movie The Greatest Story Ever Told, to the clown-faced folk singer of Godspell, to the conflicted, self-doubting, and all-too-human Jesus of The Last Temptation of Christ, to the laughing, down-to-earth Jesus in the movie called Jesus, produced in 1999, who gets into a water fight with his disciples. Why such diverse portraits of the man from Galilee? By almost any account, Jesus is the most influential person in human history. About a third of the Earth's population identifies as Christian, followers of Christ. Even our calendars identify his birth as the center point in human history. Everything before him is BC, before Christ. Everything after is AD, Anno Domini, the year of the Lord. Though Jesus is the most talked about, written about, argued about, and revered person on the planet, he is also the most enigmatic. Thousands of books have been written asking the question, who was this Jesus of Nazareth? The question is simple, but the answer obviously is not. One of the reasons for this is because the New Testament itself presents a complex and puzzling picture of Jesus. At times, Jesus' words are difficult to understand, and scholars scratch their heads over them. What did Jesus mean when he told a man to let the dead bury their own dead?